So when their debt matures, if they even have any, they might just go, "No, I don't want to pay 9%." Like it
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
Your companies do things like run a successful business on its own. It's like weird stuff.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
Guess what it's beginning to look a lot like?
Investing season.
Exactly. That Santa Claus rally. That's what it's starting to look a lot like. There's these songs about like Christmas and stuff, whatever. Santa Claus throws his money into a little bit of treasuries because he's getting older, and then the rest straight up into the stock market. He loves this time of year.
There's been some challenges at the North Pole with elf population control.
Really?
So it's getting really expensive to feed those little guys.
Elf population control. I've never even thought about this. Say more.
They breed like rabbits, Doogles. So it's a whole thing. And he's still, I mean, the population of the earth is growing, right? He still has plenty of toys to make, but man, he's having some challenges up there. I did a business consult for him a couple of weeks back. Should be a good year though. You're currently on the nice list, but it's not a done deal yet.
I like to hover right around that line. You know what I mean? Can't be too good. Before we hop in today, we love your listener mail, skippydoogles@gmail.com. We don't cover all the listener mail that comes in, but we appreciate seeing it. So thank you. Thank you. And you know what else rabbits do?
I don't want to know anything else about rabbits.
They eat just like the rest of us, is what they do.
Nonstop. The rumor in my house is that rabbits, if they don't eat, their teeth grow so large that they impact their brain or something. I'm not sure if I believe it.
Wow. No, that sounds completely scientifically legit.
Yeah, right.
I came across this Hustle. You know the Hustle? I came across this Hustle piece from 2020. It was early 2020. I hadn't seen it yet and found it to be interesting. It's the economics of all-you-can-eat buffets. What they did was they went around and they looked at the prices of about 30 all-you-can-eat buffets, and they tried to balance this out across geography, across sizes, et cetera, because you got the big buffet chains, and then you got some of the smaller buffet chains. They tried to get average pricing. What they found on average is that for every $20 in revenue, $19 goes toward overhead. So it's a $1 of margin. It's about 5% profit margin on these businesses. One thing I'd be curious about. So this was early 2020. An update in this, I'd be very curious about, because the last almost 4 years has just kind of thrown a bunch of stuff upside down. Regardless, it's still interesting to walk through this. So the way that cost breaks down is food is about $7.40, so almost 40% of it. Labor is about 30% of it, $6 of that $20. Rent about 14%, $2.80 of that $20, and then other stuff that's like depreciation, utilities, et cetera, goes in $2.80. So that leaves about $1, 5% in profit. So just like a lot of restaurants, food in general, restaurants, groceries, et cetera, it's a fairly low margin business. That's the overview. One thing I really wanted to break down, but I couldn't find they didn't have the data for it in here, is, so they talked about this one large chain called Ovation Brands that owns a bunch of major buffet chains. Every year, they said they served 85 million dinner rolls, 47 million pounds of chicken, 6 million pounds of steak, overall 49.3 billion calories over the course of a year. What I wanted to find was the average number of people that they served, because I wonder what that calorie breakdown per person ends up being. I really wanted to know. I mean, imagine if they served 49 people. It's a lot of calories. That's just what I want to know.
I mean, imagine
over the course of a year, they wouldn't be around anymore. But actually, this same brand, Ovation Brands, between 2018 and 2020, had filed for bankruptcy 3 times. So they might only have 49 people are coming in. It seemed like from some of the other data that was in here that some of the larger ones, they had like about 900 people a day. that came in. So serving a decent number of people every day, but I don't know how many different stores and whatnot they have. Anyway, the last thing I'll name here, because I found this to be interesting, is as they're thinking about increasing profit, some of the tactics they use are as follows. They put the cheap filling stuff at the front of the buffet line. 75% of buffet customers select whatever food is in the first tray. 66% of all the food they consume comes from the first 3 trays. Fascinating. They use smaller plates. That's an obvious one.
Yep.
Smaller plate sizes reduce the amount of food that people consume. They use larger than average serving spoons for things like potatoes, and then smaller than average for things like meats. So the cheaper the thing, the bigger the spoon, because they want you to get all them potatoes up in there, right? The last thing is that they will refill your water as consistently as they possibly can, because they think about Mr. Johnny Chestnut, and they want to get you all kinds of full on the water. They talked about how they balance out the like the heavy hitters. I can't remember what they called them, but it was something like the gorgers, something like that. But anyway, they would balance out the people that would come in and just dominate the buffet with those that would come in and underconsume. So they've calculated all this stuff down to a pretty solid margin.
They have 3 example diners here. One that gets like a balanced meal, and on average they make that 5% profit from them. They have one that really fills up on the cheap stuff, the potatoes, the salad, the pasta, and doesn't go for the steak, right? Their profit margin is like 20% on that individual. And then you have the dude, they'd give an example of a linebacker, the big guy that shows up and eats nothing but steak and chicken. They might lose as much as $7 on that guy.
The gorgeous gorger.
Yeah. Or negative 43% profit for him.
Wow.
But it all comes out in the wash, right? Because so also the thing, when's the last time you went to a buffet with like your family or something?
I mean, it would have been pre-2020, like before the COVID hit situation.
Yeah, I mean, if we go, and I can only remember one time in the past decade, but it's like you're there for the kids, right? They go do whatever they want, mostly consume ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty much disgusted by the whole. I'm guaranteed they're making tons of money off me. I'm not going to try and eat 7,000 calories just because.
Oh, you know what? We went to one in a hotel. Like, so it wasn't like a all you can eat buffet thing. It was just the hotel breakfast was a buffet. I get out of control. Let me just state this. Like, if we go to something like an all-inclusive resort or there's a buffet, they're not making any money.
Is it the principle of it?
For the most part, yeah. There are like 2 things. There are 2 things that are at play. One is that if you're telling me that I can have all that I can have, I'm having all I can have. That's one. The second is that I don't really, much like the rumor around horses, I don't really have a shutoff valve. So like I have to, it's all just me telling myself to stop. There isn't like a feeling of fullness that I get until I am aggressively into this thing. So between those 2 principles, it's pretty aggressive. And I know what the cheap stuff is. So for me, there's a lot of this stuff that's cheap because I'm vegetarian. So I don't get the meats and whatnot.
Cheap stuff, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, all I can eat, those all inclusives, I'd like to see the economics of those when I come into town, because I'm that person every day. They're trying to get me to like stay at other hotels.
Just as I thought we were gonna agree on the point of like we're sophisticated and mature, and there's no reason to just eat for the sake of eating. Doogles disagrees.
Very much so. Very, very much so. I'm not like they gave some specific examples in here though of people that were like, there was one lady that ate all the brownies, and then they finally had to kick her out when she was shoving the brownies into her purse. That's not me. So at least I have some dignity.
Okay, so you walk in, you hand someone $20, and you go get a tray of brownies. Like, why didn't you just get a tray of brownies at the grocery store for $10?
Yeah, no, this is
or bake your at home. Like my 6-year-old can make brownies, right? You put some eggs in, stir it up, you're done. It's
sometimes maybe she likes these brownies. I
I'm
don't
sure
know.
they're the highest quality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
When you're at your holiday party and you want to quiz people on buffets, the important fact to remember is that there are 26% less buffets today than there were about 20 years ago.
And they attribute it to at-home delivery of food. That's the attribution that they provide. There's also the fact that there's a trend of people eating healthier, which is great. But they talked about how people are getting food delivered at home, and that's a place that buffets can't compete. So if that's happening in an ordinary restaurant, you can say, I'm going to start delivering, at least you get revenue from it. But a buffet, it's not all you can eat. Like, just go to our menu and tell me all the things that you want. It's only $20. That would be the worst
Whoa,
business
no,
model.
hold up. New business model. I'm going to
Okay.
have to go shortly because I have to build this business. Drive-through buffet, but it's not a drive-through. It's we drive the buffet to your house. You fill up your plate and we leave.
So a drive-to buffet.
Drive-to. Yeah, taking over the nation.
That's fantastic. I love this. You should take out a loan for this.
Oh, buffets, good. The graphics in this are great, guys. If you have any interest, they did a really nice job of making it easy to digest.
All right, what you got?
Well, I'm still hung up on Munger, so I think it was Tuesday. Munger was delivered directly to my earbuds. The Collison brothers, who run Stripe, are Munger fans, as everyone claims to be a Munger fan. At this point, I'm starting to, sometimes you have to weed it out, but they are true Munger fans. They have come out with a brand new edition of Poor Charlie's Almanac that
The Collison brothers did?
The Collison brothers.
Ah, okay.
Stripe Press. So first and foremost, can be downloaded audio or Kindle book for free. And you can get a hard copy for $20. It used to run like 60 to $100. So
the same price as a buffet. Same price as a buffet.
Exactly.
Okay.
They're doing people a solid. But in addition to that, we talked about Munger's. As best I can gather now, Doogles, there was going to be a Munger celebration for his 100th birthday. That's why he was doing all the press, right? And then he unfortunately passed 34 days beforehand. But there's all this stuff. Like, this podcast episode was already recorded with him and John Collison. Did you get a chance to listen to it?
I did not. I didn't know if it was like AI of what Munger would have said, if he'd but it was an actual recording of Munger. That's what you're telling me?
Yes.
Okay.
So much better, because clearly the Collison brothers have a kind of a longer term relationship with him. Like, I compare it to the Acquired podcast that came out recently. Audio wasn't great and it was kind of all over the place. This was well produced, well thought out podcast episode. Kind of an amazing gift, after he passes, to just have this show up. So
yeah,
I'd really recommend this. I did quotes last week. I'm going to do 4 more quotes from Charlie that I think really almost spoke to me at this point in the game. He's really talking about his philosophies in life as it relates to life and business. And he says, my idea is so simple. If you make your living selling things to other people that are good for them, it is safer and more profitable than selling stuff that is bad. So he's not a huge fan of alcohol or drugs, which is perfectly reasonable. And what he's saying here is largely I can look at 2 types of businesses. One that is a great example of something that positively impacts something, but maybe it is something related to improving a person's health.
Yep.
And then the opposite could be something that deteriorates someone's health. They both might do $1 billion worth of revenue, and they both might run 20% profit margins. And he's saying the one that is naturally better for the world and for the people buying it actually is a better business. Even though they both do 20% profit margins, one is good for society and one is, I'm putting this in quotes, bad for society.
Sustainability is a part of that. You assume it's going to be around for longer because people will catch on or just stop. The trend will go toward the positive, right? At some point, I imagine. That makes sense to me. I like that.
I mean, it's kind of positive sum game versus not positive sum game.
Yeah.
I had certainly heard him articulate that before, but this week it was just so clear to me and kind of
Yeah.
inspiring. Like it was cool. Along those same lines, he says, I decided I was going to sell the kind of stuff that I would buy if I was on the other side.
Yeah, I love that.
It's about being fair. It's about love it. And I also wanted to work with the kind of people that I admire. This one knocks my socks off. I have a special appreciation for this in the past 5 years or so. I see so many folks out there feeling like they're stuck in the rat race and dealing with a group of people or a boss that like doesn't treat them with respect or isn't a good human.
There's a general like theme that's overarching that if you assume, let's go to the start of your business life. If you assume that you are going to live a long time, be in the game for a long time, and encounter many of the same people over that multi-decade career, how would you run your business life? That seems to be like the question that's then asked, and where these make a lot of sense. Like if someone says you're going to interact with this same person 15 times over the next 50 years in your business career, would you be like, yeah, I'm definitely going to try and screw them over? No. So it's a live your life as if that is the case. And in many cases, it might be the case. 15 times is probably a lot, but multiple, right? Many times.
Well, and it happens. And I think the wisdom of a 99-year-old saying this even makes it more true. But it's not necessarily profound. It kind of is profound because it comes from Munger, who is a genius in all things. You know, like he excelled in so many areas, not just making money. It's lovely. It was meaningful to me this week. Last one along the same lines. I'd rather have a brief telephone conversation with somebody I trust than a 40-page contract prepared by the finest law firm in the world with someone I don't trust. Builds on all those same points. Like work with people you admire, be fair and honest. And then trust is maybe it's one of the highest principles that you should value in business and in life.
He's not saying this directly, but another way maybe to say that same point is that if you need a piece of paper to have comfort in that someone's going to uphold their word, you shouldn't work with that person. That doesn't mean don't use contracts. Like use contracts, it's the base. But he's saying, but I think that there's a part of it that's indirect. That's saying if that's what you need, then it's not worth it.
Well, and it's a good sanity check in I'd say business dealings, but in almost anything. If you feel like you have to keep adding additional provisions to the contract to protect yourself, it's your brain telling you that you might not trust the situation, the people you're dealing with, some other thing.
There's sometimes in contracts where there'll be some provision like that is getting argued over. I'll be like, if that is the thing that they're coming after us for, we've messed up a lot of other stuff. Like that's not the first thing that they're trying. Like they're at that point they are trying to find anything to get out of the deal or whatever it might be, and so we've already messed it up. That's cool.
So the overarching theme here is not every business gets to live as principled a life as Charlie Munger chose to. Not every individual is even willing to be on their high horse about those principles. But what's fun, and I don't know why this seems so unique, it does seem pretty unique to be highly principled like that and to have high standards to work with people you trust and to treat people fairly. But it can be done, and it can be done very successfully, almost based on any measure of success you want to choose. So I just loved it. Really good podcast. John Collison asked great questions and also pushes back on Charlie more than almost anyone I can remember in the recent past. Like he tried to argue for crypto. Like who's dumb enough to go to Charlie Munger and like say your stance on crypto is wrong? I
want to hear that. I want to hear that alone.
It's super interesting. Every interview I've seen with Munger in the past decade, it seems like it's just people treating him as if he sits on a pedestal and just whatever he says is immediately gospel and no one really pushes back. And I understand why, but there was a little more of that than I expected. It was really fun. It's a gift. It's one of those podcasts you should download and probably listen to once a year.
And Charlie Munger from outside in seems like one of those people that you respect that. You respect the pushback as long as it's intelligent, right? And thought through and whatnot. That's it. The productive tension is what creates more learning in the future. Well, I'm going to listen to it.
Yeah. So this podcast, I don't think I mentioned, it's Invest Like the Best, which is typically Patrick Shaughnessy's podcast, but he handed the reins over to John Collison for this specific interview. And then they were sitting on it. I think it happened like 6 months back.
Oh, really?
For his 100-year birthday. And then they decided, hey, it's the time. Everyone would want us to put it out there. So that is my strongest recommendation of what you should do this week.
I love it. All right. I'm going to go to one of my topics, reach in the fishbowl, go to one of my topics that I enjoy discussing, that I find to be interesting. It's about universal basic income. So Give Directly. You familiar with Give Directly?
Yeah. At one point early on, I think we were trying to figure out how to either support or raise money. Yeah. Give Directly is a good thing. Yeah. I'm excited for these results.
So Give Directly is an organization, nonprofit, that you can donate to, and then they will find people in poverty through a variety of different programs, and they give the money, guess what, directly to those people. There was a study or an experiment that they started in 2016 around universal basic income in Kenya. And the first results by independent researchers from that experiment have been released. I haven't read the raw findings yet, but there are a couple different articles, one from Vox, one from NPR that I took a look at. And it's super interesting stuff. I'm going to start off by giving an overview of the program itself, and then give a couple little highlights that I found in there. Okay, so first, as I mentioned, it was in Kenya. What they did was there were 26,000 people roughly in total that they were giving money to. Around 6,000 of those people, they gave but $20 a month, every month for 12 years. So that's the first part. So they're 7 years into that 12-year span at this moment. So that's one group. Mm-hmm. A second group, they gave a lump sum to. And the third group, they gave the equivalent of that lump sum in monthly payments, but only for 2 years. So it's something like $20 a month for 2 years versus $50. Or sorry, $500. That was not good math, by the way, that right there. So there's one group,
and then there's a third group that got $1,000 up front. Is that how this works?
No. So the first group, like the main part, was 6,000 people, $20 a month for 12 years. So that group is still happening. That's monthly. Then I'll do the second monthly group to make it easier to understand. The second group was also monthly, but only for 2 years. So $20 a month for 2 years. The third group was a lump sum. That was a comparison to that 2-year group. So they got $500 up front.
Okay.
So a couple interesting points that came out of this. One is, and by the way that they did this was there's this kind of equivalent to Venmo product over there, in Kenya called M-Pesa, and it's ubiquitous. Like nearly everyone uses it. I think they said 96% of people use it, something like that. That's the way what they use to distribute the funds. Okay. So a couple of things that came from it. One, if you compare the groups that the group number 2 and group number 3 that I mentioned, so $20 a month for 2 years versus the lump sum of that equivalent over 2 years, the lump sum people won out in nearly every measure that they found. So an example is that they're more likely to start businesses. If you looked at how their income that was coming in, it was double the people that got it monthly. And the reason was because they would get that lump sum and they would invest it. They would start a company. They had the money they had upfront capital to do things. Mm-hmm. Whereas the people that got it monthly didn't, right? So they were still having to live month to month. Then what became interesting is, though, if you look at the group of people that were getting $20 a month, but will be getting it for 12 years, they outperformed both of those groups. And so that's when it becomes interesting between the comparison of monthly versus lump sum. The reason that they outperformed, they had the most flexibility, because you could take it monthly right? And be able to balance your month to month as if it's, like income, like normal income stream that's coming to you. But because they were getting it for 12 years, they had a greater capability to use that to get credit. So they had this flexibility of either, if they wanted it, they could get lump sum payments. They went and called,
and
let me
if
look
not,
this up.
they had a safety net.
Exactly. So there was something that they called, it's a ROSCA, ROSCA. It's a rotating savings and credit association. And so they could like form these and be able to get lump sum payments. So I think it's like a super interesting thing. Then there's a bunch of stuff they didn't find, which is good to look through. And some of that is typically what you might see as arguments against during universal basic income. So like they didn't find that people were spending it on alcohol and drugs. They didn't find that people would then just like up their fashion, right? Things like that. They didn't find that it drove inflation. So there are all these things they also didn't find.
See, I'm shocked they didn't find that it drove inflation. Although, what'd you say? 6,000 participants.
So it's 6,000 got the 12-year part, and then another 20,000 were in the second two buckets.
Yeah, so still 26,000 participants. I don't know the population of Kenya, but it's a very small sliver of that. Yep. That would be one. I always found this fascinating, and I'm glad we're doing more experiments around it because I think the results will always have some counterintuitive parts to them. Like you just don't know how people are going to react until they actually have the dollars in their hand.
Yeah.
But my remaining question is, so what if you do it for half the population?
Yeah, exactly.
How does that change the dynamic?
I think that's right. Because they're saying so far it doesn't seem like, it's driving inflation because the dollars are spread over a wide range of products. So people are buying more things, but it's spread out. And so maybe you could say it's not inflation that is impacting the economy in any material way, but prices may have gone up, right? A little bit. That's the way maybe to look at it. So it's a pretty cool way to look at this. Oh, one other thing is the people that got monthly checks were generally happier and reported better mental health than the lump sum payment folks too. They have hypotheses for that, but it's an interesting point. There was something that they think about getting a bunch of money up front that produces more stress. And you're like, I now have a bunch of money that I don't exactly know what to do with, and I have to figure out what to do with it. Whereas the monthly payments don't have that same stress. That's the hypothesis they have.
To me, that's easy to follow. It's the safety net we talked about, right? Like provides some stability, even if, to use a poor example, your house burns down tomorrow or you get robbed, like you still know that there's a little financial security built in for you.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And one of the people that did the independent study, his name is Abhijit Banerjee. He and someone whose name I cannot remember wrote this book called Good Economics for Hard Times. I think we might have talked about it like a year and a half ago, something like that. It's good stuff. So put that on the Substack too, the book, if you all are interested. It's good stuff.
Love it.
All right, I'm gonna reach in the fishbowl for one other probably quick hit, because it's an unknown exactly what this is going to do, but I found it to be interesting. So the New York Times came out with this article called "Corporate America Has Dodged the Damage of High Rates for Now." That's the only way I can think of how to say that. So the points that this is bringing up at the high level are that what we know is that interest rates have gone up pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. They've gone up fast. They've gone up and at a high rate very quickly. And so you have all these companies that had debt. You're like, ooh, okay, interest rate payments going up. What's going to happen to all these zombie companies, right? We talked about that. What's going to happen to the junk bond type companies? All this. What's going to happen to profits? What they found so far is that for American companies, the difference between their interest payments and their interest receipts is actually it's the lowest that it's been since the 1980s. So that's a good thing, because what's happening is companies are being able to put excess cash into savings, and they've locked in lower interest rates prior when interest rates were low.
Yep.
And so it's something, let's see, it's $137 billion roughly at the end of September as the difference between those two. And again, it's in comparison to the 1980s. And the graph of that like net amount is pretty dramatic. It's huge increase up until about a year and a half ago, and then has plunged very dramatically. So that's where we are right now. So companies are doing in aggregate, right? There are companies that are not doing well over this, but in aggregate, companies are doing pretty well at the moment. But, and this is completely non-scientific, they say a quote unquote wave of debt is coming due in the corporate bond and loan market over the next 2 years. What is a wave? I don't know how large that is. I'm not sure. But where they gave one specific number, they said roughly a third of the $1.3 trillion of debt issued to companies in the so-called junk bond market comes due in the next 3 years. And so what's going to start happening is where companies were able to borrow at, let's call it somewhere in the 3 to 6% range, depending on what their credit score was. That's now going to be more like in the 6 to 9% range. That's so 50% above or double, roughly, is what they're saying.
I think it could be higher. I think I'd go like 8 to 12, to be honest.
When they said that if you're in the small business category, so this is for large corporations, they said for small businesses, it is more, it's in the double digit range of what you're talking about there. It's kind of fascinating in a way that, like I said at the beginning, we don't know what it's going to look like, but the next 2 to 3 years when a lot of this debt comes due, we're going to see interest payment changes. I also think from an investor standpoint, potentially there could be some opportunities on the other side of this. If companies, this is a market that the average retail investor, as we've talked about, it would not be safe to get into like at an individual company level, but there could be some interesting ETF opportunities in like 2 or 3 years if you're looking at the aggregate of companies that are now having to pay out higher amounts.
There's lots of interesting opportunities. I mean, we talked about Howard Marks dangling a carrot here about 3 months ago, saying it might be time to look at debt with a sound investment process. There are pieces in the debt market that look better than U.S. stocks, and he's exactly right. And the really fun part about that is if your typical corporate debt is like on a 3 to 5 year term, it's exactly what you said. It's right now they took out debt, whatever, in 2020 with super low interest rates. Now, if they're sitting on any cash, they're making 5% on that cash. And that debt repayment is probably more secure than it ever has been in the recent past. Now, what happens 3 years from now when they have to refinance that debt at twice the rate? That debt is much less secure, but they're also paying higher rates for it. My thought here, Doogles, is that the banks led the way. Like the banks had trouble with this and still have trouble with this, but that started. When was SBV? Was that almost?
It was this year. It was 7 months ago.
7.
Yeah, okay. April, May, something like that.
So the banks led the way because they had to mark to market earlier, or again, because a bank run happened. Like if a bank run didn't happen, I don't even know that we'd know as much about the typical regional bank's balance sheet.
Well, they had to mark to market because they needed to go get money.
Yeah. Because there was a bank run.
Yeah, exactly.
But now your average business is just in a somewhat similar situation, but it's 2 or 3 years delayed.
It's so it's going to be something to watch. The whole collapse of that's my word, I'm being aggressive, collapse of the 60-40 portfolio. It's already started to get more interesting now. And over the next 3 years, it'll be interesting as well. And the 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, to give you a balance. And over years, that's been something that's kind of like a safe way to balance between stocks and bonds. It's been recommended as like a rule of thumb. And in the last couple of years has been very weak because of the collapse of bond values. But it's gonna be a thing, man.
So get this. I love this. Not because I wish ill on any company that is running high debt, but because my typical investment has almost no debt. If it has debt, it's very little. It has a strong cash position. It has all these factors that make it really impossible to go bankrupt. Well, that's been a disadvantage recently because debt's been so cheap that their competitors can leverage up and make investments that cost them almost nothing.
Yep.
3 years from now, those companies, if they still decide to run with heavy leverage, are in a much tougher environment where my typical investment isn't relying on any of that. The rates don't even matter because they could pay off all their debt tomorrow if they want to. So when their debt matures, if they even have any, they might just go, no, I don't want to pay 9%. Like it doesn't make sense.
Your companies do things like run a successful business on its own. It's like weird stuff.
It's crazy. Yeah. Like just profitably make money over decades.
Yeah.
And do it in a way that is super boring and non-sexy, and so no one wants to invest in it. But it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Stoked.
You got anything else?
Anything else in your fishbowl, good sir?
I'm bone dry.
All right. Please share the show with a friend for the holiday season. Say, listen, I listen to some nerds, and you got some free time on your hands during the holidays. Check these guys out. Hit us with listener mail, skippydoogles@gmail.com. Again, premium subscriptions. If you want to get the show early, get access to premium content, you can grab that skippydoogles.supercast.com. And the Substack is kind of the one-stop shop, but the best way to get there is just to go to skippydoogles.com, and you can get anywhere you need.
Thank you, everybody.